All right, so in the wake of Roe v. Wade being officially overturned by our right-wing reactionary Supreme Court, we have heard conservatives coming out and relentlessly pushing this narrative that it's simply about states' rights, right? It's about returning the issue of abortion back to the states because in their delusional minds, this would somehow better reflect the democratic and nuanced views of the American people when it comes to abortion. But we already have some conservatives who are going a little bit off script and giving us a glimpse in terms of exactly what they will be attempting to do if they successfully take back the House and the Senate and the presidency over the next couple of years. So let's go ahead and watch this clip from Representative Mike Kelly from Pennsylvania, basically pushing to federally outlaw abortion.
Introduce the Heartbeat Protection Act in the U.S. House of Representatives. This bill would legally prohibit future abortions from being performed if a preborn child's heartbeat can be detected, with the exception for when a mother's life is endangered. It is a science-based, humanity-respecting solution suited to the new landscape in which we find ourselves.
All right, so there's a lot to get into there. I know it was a short little clip, but already just so much rampant information coming out of this guy, Mike Kelly. So first off, in terms of whether or not this is science-based or humanity-based, it absolutely is not. This is completely arbitrary. It is something that is driven by their theocratic agenda and ideology. It is not anything that is based in science in terms of this heartbeat bill that he is proposing. So a little bit more information on that from the AP. They say fetal heartbeat in abortion laws taps emotion, not science. So what are they talking about here? They say Dr. Michael Kakovich has treated his share of pregnant women. So when Republican lawmakers across the U.S. began passing bans on abortion at what they term the first detectable fetal heartbeat, he was exacerbated. And that's because at the point where advanced technology can detect that first flutter as early as 6 weeks, the embryo isn't yet a fetus. I mean, we're talking about 6 weeks here before most women even know that they're pregnant in the first place. But they say as early as 6 weeks, the embryo isn't yet even a fetus and doesn't have a heartbeat. Not even yet a fetus, let alone a fully developed child. But they say an embryo is termed a fetus beginning at the 11th week of pregnancy, medical experts say. So on that first point that he was making, no, this is absolutely not science-based in any way, shape, or form. It is, again, part of their theocratic agenda and how they view abortion rights in this country. But number two, we already have an idea. We already have testimonies and stories coming out on exactly what this type of bill would do in terms of catastrophic consequences for women who are suffering from miscarriages or ectopic pregnancies or a whole host of different complications that don't even have anything to do with elective abortions. So just to give you a perspective on that, one specific story here from the Boston Globe, they say Dr. Jessian Munoz, an OBGYN in San Antonio, Texas, who treats high-risk pregnancies, said medical decisions used to be clear-cut. It was like, the mom's life is in danger, we must evacuate the uterus by whatever means that may be, he said. Whether it's surgical or medical, that's the treatment. So the standard that was in place before a lot of these abortion bans were officially allowed to take place because of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, basically you have doctors who have the freedom, relative freedom, even with the restrictions that were put in place in a lot of these conservative states before the overturning of Roe v. Wade, you still had doctors who were able to make calculations within their own heads, have conversations with the woman in question about exactly what the risk to her own health would be, and they would be able to make that decision as a private consultation between the doctor and the woman. But now with a lot of these different bills that are being put in place, like the heartbeat bill that he is trying to push at the federal level, now there's a third party that is entering into this equation. No longer is it just doctors and the woman. Now you also have to worry about potential legal or criminal consequences for doctors who are proceeding with medical procedures that could literally just save a woman's life in a lot of these different contexts. So they get more into the details here, saying, now he said, doctors whose patients develop pregnancy complications are struggling to determine whether a woman is sick enough to justify an abortion. And with the fall of Roe v. Wade, the art of medicine is lost and actually has been replaced by fear, he said. And Munoz said he faced an awful predicament with a recent patient who had started to miscarry and developed a dangerous womb infection. Keep in mind, roughly 30% of pregnancies can end in miscarriages, so not an unsubstantial amount of people we're talking about here. But he said the fetus still had signs of a heartbeat, so an immediate abortion, the usual standard of care, would have been illegal under Texas law. And he said, we physically watched her get sicker and sicker and sicker until the fetal heartbeat stopped the next day, and then we could intervene, he said. The patient developed complications, required surgery, lost multiple liters of blood, and had to be put on a breathing machine, all because we were essentially 24 hours behind. So this is the type of consequence that you can expect at a large scale as a result of these types of proposals coming out of conservatives right now with these bans on abortion, whether it's within their own states or whether it's, inevitably when they get the chance to pass this at the federal level. These are the types of consequences that you're going to be able to see. Doctors who are now forced to wait sometimes days in order to act on potentially life-threatening situations because of these laws that are being put in place by reactionary conservatives who have absolutely no idea about the actual science and medicine behind these types of situations that doctors and patients are facing. So it's obviously catastrophic, and I can only anticipate we're going to be seeing many, many more of these stories coming out over the next couple of weeks and months, as a lot of these doctors are forced to delay or to altogether forego treatments that could save the life of the mother. And that ties into another important point on this, which is, conservatives like to use the easy out here by saying, oh, well, our piece of legislation, it makes exemptions in the case of rape, it makes exemptions in the case of incest, and it makes exemptions in the case of the threats to the life of a mother. Now, on all three of those different things, think about how difficult it is. Number one, in cases of like rape or incest, think about how absolutely atrocious the U.S. police and criminal justice system is generally with processing and handling rape cases. It is incredibly difficult to even prove that you've been raped in the first place. So these standards are not as easy as just simply walking in and saying, I'm a victim of sexual assault and therefore I qualify for abortion. It's very, very difficult in order to meet that standard. And then when it comes to the health and safety or the life of a mother, that's also something that's not very easy to calculate. You don't just walk in to a doctor's office and you have something on your wrist that says I am X% likely to die if I proceed with this pregnancy. That's not how it works. Doctors have to make difficult decisions. They have to make difficult calculations, and a lot of times there's significant gray area there. So it's not as simple as like a cutoff point and saying if you're 51% likely to die from proceeding with this pregnancy, then you can qualify for getting an abortion. That's not how it's working in practice, and you can see because of a lot of these laws that are being put in place right now that doctors are fucking terrified. They're terrified to literally engage in medical procedures to save the life of their patients because they're worried about potentially losing their license or even being thrown in jail for conducting these life-saving procedures. So this in and of itself is absolutely obviously dangerous and atrocious, but this is exactly what the Republican Party is pushing. Now we get to another recent interview where Ted Cruz here, this absolute demon, was basically floating out the idea similar to what we heard from Justice Clarence Thomas, that next, not only will they go for abortion, but now they're also going to be going for gay marriage rights as well. So I wanted to go ahead and watch this clip and then get a little bit more into the bullshit nature of the states' rights argument that is underlying a lot of these pushes by conservatives. So let's go ahead and watch this clip from Ted Cruz.
In Obergefell, the court said, no, we know better than you guys do, and now every state must sanction and permit gay marriage. I think that decision was clearly wrong when it was decided. It was the court overreaching. In Obergefell, the court said, no, we know better than you guys do, and now every state must sanction and...
Right, so you guys understand exactly what he's saying there, right? So this is what they're going to be going for next. I would not be surprised if, in the next session that these Supreme Court justices end up taking up something to do with Obergefell v. Hodges or contraceptive rights as well, or sodomy laws even. All of those things were things that were floated out by Justice Clarence Thomas and now are being talked about by conservatives at the highest levels within government. So, complete, obviously, bullshit arguments being put forward here. And when it comes to the states' rights issue, understand that when conservatives talk about states' rights, what they're really talking about is pushing a lot of these issues, these civil protections, these fundamental human rights or civil rights that we consider to be rights in this country. An overwhelming majority of the American people believe gay marriage should be maintained as the law of the land. It's roughly 71% at an all-time high right now. Same thing with abortion, sitting at near all-time highs in terms of support for abortion rights being protected at the federal level. But the reason why they are pushing for the states' rights approach to this is because they have basically been engaging in near decades-long process to hijack a lot of these state legislatures around the country, been very wildly successful at doing that, and basically their strategy is to take over these state legislatures, proceed with gerrymandering and putting in place a bunch of other rules and protections to make sure that they never lose power, that even if Democrats win by overwhelming margins, they will still maintain control within these state legislatures. And so that's why they want these issues to go back to the states. It has nothing to do with states' rights. It's about giving these gerrymandered, usually along racial lines, gerrymandered state legislatures controlled by Republicans, giving them the opportunity to impose their theocratic agenda on the overwhelming majority of people who do not support that agenda. But a little bit of background in terms of how we got to this point with Republicans dominating state legislatures. So originally, this push really happened under the Obama administration, when conservatives were realizing that they had little chance to actually win at the higher levels of government at the time. So here from Quorum, they say in 2009, President Obama's party controlled both chambers of 27 state legislatures, and 8 years later, Democrats control both chambers in only 13 states. So they lost, 14 states here, or roughly like 12 states here, 14 states, I guess. Among the states that slipped from Democratic control are Wisconsin, North Carolina, Iowa, and West Virginia, states that were key to the election of Donald Trump. And they say, according to a report from the National Conference of State Legislatures, the Democratic Party has lost a net total of 13 governorships and 816 state legislative seats since President Obama entered office, the most of any president since Dwight Eisenhower in the fucking 50s. Okay, so this is how we got to this point, with Democrats basically overlooking the importance of state legislatures in terms of controlling the agenda within these states, but also controlling the districting and all of these other processes that also play out at the federal elections level. But again, this has been something that has been in the works for decades in this country. This was the strategy that was put in place by conservatives, knowing that they would not be able to have control over policy in other ways. They are using these state legislatures to push their reactionary right-wing agenda and basically lock out Democrats from ever being able to take control of these states again. So just to give you a perspective in terms of how actually terrible the situation is right now in a lot of these Republican-controlled states. So, basically the situation is, they're going to use Wisconsin as an example here, but basically the situation is, because of how gerrymandered these districts are, even if Democrats win overwhelming majorities in terms of the popular vote in these state legislature elections, Republicans can still maintain majorities or even supermajorities within these states. So they say the foundation of Republican control of Wisconsin is one of the most extreme gerrymanders in American history. Back in 2018, Republicans lost the popular vote in the state Senate races by 52.3% to 46.9%, and yet they gained 2 seats for a 19-14 majority. So they lost the popular vote by roughly 8% here or so, 7-8% here, and they still gained 2 seats for a 19-14 majority in the state Senate. So absolutely not even close to being reflective of the popular vote in a state like Wisconsin, which, is a swing state, could, if the popular vote actually mattered, be a heavy Democratic state. But they give another example here in the state assembly, which is even worse, saying that they lost the popular vote. Republicans lost the popular vote 53-45%, yet lost only 1 seat to retain a 63-36 supermajority, and that was a wave election year for Democrats. It is de facto impossible for Democrats to win, given any remotely realistic distribution of votes. So this is why conservatives have been so focused on pushing this states' rights issue. It's because they know in states that are controlled by Republican-led state legislatures that they can effectively push Democrats out to the point where even in some swing states like Wisconsin, that the popular vote doesn't even matter. You can win the popular vote over and over and over again, and they will still maintain supermajority control within some of these chambers in these state legislatures. So this is why they're focusing on the state legislature approach and focusing on that as if it's like a states' rights issue. It has nothing to do with that. This is about them using undemocratic means in order to lock in their own power within these states and then push their agenda on the overwhelming majority of the country that disagrees with it. But it's not just the current fucked up situation with gerrymandering and conservative rule essentially eternally locked in a lot of these states. We also have this case that we've been talking about on this channel regarding the independent state legislature theory, which is something that the Supreme Court is also going to be hearing in the next couple of months. So a little bit more information on that. They say Moore v. Harper is a case that was brought by members of the North Carolina state legislature who are arguing the U.S. Supreme Court to reinstate a congressional map in the North Carolina that the North Carolina Supreme Court struck down as unconstitutional. And for centuries, most states have enacted election laws the same way that they enact other type of legislation. They are subject to legal challenge, they may face a veto, and some state legislatures delegate authority to administrative agencies like redistricting commissions. They're trying to get away with all of those checks in place. They say, however, the theory asserted by the members of the North Carolina legislature in Moore v. Harper argue that election law is different. The theory is known as independent state legislature theory, or ISL theory, and it asserts that the U.S. Constitution gives state legislatures and state legislatures alone complete and unchecked authority over determining the time, places, and manner of holding elections for U.S. senators and representatives. So now they're using their positioning with this, minority control over these state legislatures to now bump this up to the federal level, where they will now effectively, if the Supreme Court rules in their favor, will be able to rig federal elections for the House of Representatives and the Senate in the exact same goddamn way that they are doing at the state level. And they say in this case, the North Carolina legislatures argue that they can enact congressional maps that violate their own state constitution, and the North Carolina Supreme Court does not have the authority to enforce the state constitution to stop them. And they say, as Helen White at Protect Democracy describes, the most radical version of ISL theory would hold that state courts cannot strike down state election law for federal elections. State legislatures cannot delegate election authority to other branches or administrative agencies, and governors cannot veto the actions of state legislatures, and even state constitutional provisions are void insofar as federal elections are concerned. The version of the theory advanced in North Carolina case is one of these more extreme versions. So again, another part of this that they didn't mention in this specific paragraph is that under this independent state legislature doctrine, they would be able to appoint their own slate of electors for the presidential election in 2024, completely disregarding the popular vote in their states. So in other words, depending on what the Supreme Court is going to decide in this case, I think we all know whose side they're going to fall on here, but depending on what they decide on this case, we could end up in a situation where the 2024 election map goes the exact same way as it did in 2020, and yet you could have the Republican win that election because these state legislatures around the country just decided they wanted to appoint their own slate of electors. So it's obviously just completely undemocratic and ridiculous, but this is exactly what the conservative movement, this is what the Republican Party stands for right now. This is their agenda. They are pushing a theocratic agenda on the rest of the country. They are using extremely undemocratic means to hijack state legislatures, to gerrymander the fuck out of districts, usually along racial lines. Now they're trying to push for the ISL theory to basically get rid of any remaining checks and balances on their already gerrymandered districts, push this up to the federal level, rig elections for Congress and the Senate, and basically create a situation where we have minority, right-wing, reactionary, theocratic rule in this country right now. So, don't make any mistakes. This isn't about states' rights, has absolutely nothing to do with that. This is about Republicans using all means that they have at their disposal, using the power that they have in order to push their agenda on the rest of the country. And meanwhile, Democrats, even while holding the majority in the House, in the Senate, and having the presidency, are seemingly willing to sit back and do absolutely nothing to prevent this takeover from happening.